Hi there, this is Colin McGarry's Walking D-Day. Today's video is about Vichy. Vichy became the centre of the infamous Petain regime. That was chosen because it was a spa town. Now, as the Germans invaded France in 1940, the French government left Paris to go to Tours. And then as the Germans advanced again, they went down to Bordeaux. And then Petain, on the 16th of June, he declared a ceasefire. And then on the 22nd of June, they signed the armistice. And then the French government went across to Vichy. And that was in the sort of unoccupied part of France. Now the Germans occupied the north, controlled the north. And there was an agreement between Hitler and Petain. The Vichy government would control the south of France. As I said, Vichy was chosen because it was a spa town. And so there was lots of hotels to put up the officers and have offices for the ministers. And there was big rooms for having meetings. So that's why Vichy became connected to the infamous Petain regime. Now, before the war, it was a lovely spa town, and today it's a charming spa town. Now, it's Petain past, doesn't jump out at you as you walk around, but you can find leaflets in the tourist office that explain where different things were. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, the more observant of you might recognise that we're not actually in Vichy. I'm in Italy. Vichy was yesterday. When the war was declared in 1939, Albert Lebrun was president. His prime minister was Edward Daladier. It was Daladier who went to Munich in 1938 with Chamberlain, where they signed a Munich agreement with Hitler. The Munich agreement gave Hitler control of the Sudetenland in return for behaving himself elsewhere. That lasted till September 1939, when he invaded Poland, upon which France and Great Britain declared war. During the ensuing phony war, so called because there was no combat between Germany and France and Britain, Stalin invaded Finland. Daladier was criticised for not reacting to this aggression, so he resigned and was replaced as Prime Minister by Paul Reynaud on the 21st of March 1940. After 7 months of the phony war, Germany invaded through Holland and Belgium on the 10th of May. That was the day that Churchill was appointed Prime Minister in Britain. The British Expedition Force and the French Army had many more tanks than Germany, but neither had learned how to use them effectively. The ensuing debacle led to Britain leaving through Dunkirk. As German troops advanced into France, the government of Reynaud leaves Paris on the 10th of June. On the 13th of June, they were at Tours on the Loire River. There was a meeting with Churchill present. The choice for the government wasn't simple. There were those for continuing the combat in France, those for continuing the combat from the colonies, and those for an armistice. Under the influence of Churchill, the majority were for continuing the fight. On the 14th of June, they arrive in Bordeaux. For the third time in 70 years, Bordeaux is the capital of France. President Lebrun is at the prefect's private house. Reynaud is at the army HQ in the same street. Petain had been a hero of the First World War. Since March 1939, he'd been the ambassador in Spain. Now, at the age of 84, he was back in France and had a position in the War Ministry. On the 15th of June, there was another meeting. The majority were for an armistice. Paul Reynaud resigned and Petain was appointed head of government. On the 16th, he called a ceasefire.
On the 18th of June, Charles de Gaulle from London, he made the call over the BBC for the French to keep on the combat. This became known as the famous Appel de 18 Juin, or the call of the 18th of June. he was designated as being a traitor by Petain.
At the end of World War I, in November 1918, the Germans had signed the armistice in a railway carriage at Compiègne, north of Paris. Hitler got his revenge by making the French sign the armistice in the same railway carriage on the same spot at Compiègne on the 22nd of June. The agreement between Hitler and Petain was that the Germans would control the area they had already occupied, plus the Atlantic coast. The Petain regime would control the south of France, the so-called Free Zone. Bordeaux was in the occupied zone, so the government had to move again. They moved to Clermont-Ferrand, but that wasn't suitable as the officers and ministries had to be spread throughout the town and around the town. Vichy was then chosen. Vichy was a spa town, so had many hotels to house officers and ministers, and banquet rooms to hold meetings. So, early July 1940, Vichy became synonymous with the infamous Petain regime. On the 10th of July, a historic vote took place in the Opera House and Casino. Petain assumed full power. There was a vote on the motion. Out of 846 total of senators and members of parliament, 569 voted for, only 80 voted against the motion, 20 abstained, and others were just absent. This put an end to the Third Republic. Hôtel du Parc was requisitioned by the government. Many rooms were used as ministries. Petain had a whole floor for his use. As I mentioned earlier, Petain had been a hero in the First World War. He had helped lead France to victory. There was a personality cult around him. Across France, many people felt that although it looked like he was collaborating with the occupier, he was just biding time, waiting to strike back. This idea soon became obviously false to many, but the cult still held, especially in Vichy. People would be outside the Hôtel du Parc on Sundays, hoping to see Petain. If he appeared, he would make a point of kissing babies. Many countries accepted this situation, including the United States. Villers was the embassy for the US. In 1942, after war being declared between the US and Germany, the ambassador left. The building was taken over by the Swiss. Just across the road from the US embassy was the Sintra Bar. The building had been built as a chalet for Napoleon III. It became the meeting place for the Vichy high society. Many political and commercial deals were carried out here. The bar continued after the war and finally closed in the 1970s. The French Republic motto was, and is, liberty, equality and fraternity. The motto of the Petain regime was travail, famille, patrie. That means work, family and state. Supporting family values sounds good, but being extreme right-wing, it meant a woman's place is just to produce babies. So there were nurseries set up. This was one of them, and Madame Petain came to visit the babies. Life was hard during the war, due to rationing. This led to an increase in infant mortality. Vichy being the flagship of the regime, efforts were made to reduce the effect of rationing. Everything was rationed during the war. This building was where people came to get their ration cards. It's surprising that this painted sign is still visible. This building today is an annex of the town hall. During the war, hardly anything was black and white. There were people that seemed to be collaborating, but were doing so as a cover for their resistance activities. There were people in the resistance organisations, and there were some who believed in Petain, but were resisting the Germans. They were later called the Vichy Stowe Resistance. Pierre Berthomier was one of those. He joined the Alliance network just after being demobilised from the army. He was a pilot for the Air Postal Service Air Bleu. He took mail from the Hôtel du Parc to other parts of the Free Zone. That allowed him to find suitable landing sites for clandestine landings. In 1943 he was arrested and sent to a camp in Alsace. In the spring of 1944 he and many others were executed. 4 notable resistants lived at these 2 addresses. René Chabrier and Yvette Poussy lived here. Their mission was to identify civil servants who could do serious damage to the resistant movements. They would transmit their findings to Lyon. Alphonse and Hélène Juge lived here. Alphonse Juge was a civil servant and resistant. He was feeding a lot of useful information to Chabrier and Poussy. He was arrested by the French agents working for the Germans in January of 1944. The others were arrested a month later. The men were executed, but Yvette Poussy returned from Ravensbrück at the end of the war. When Petain arrived in Vichy, the mayor was Pierre-Victor Léger. He was a member of the Radical Socialist Party. Across France there was a purge to eliminate any mayors thought to be uncooperative with the National Revolution, but Léger stayed in place. Many documents show that he was loyal to the regime, but many witnesses say he was actually a resistant. One of his main attributes for Petain was that he knew the town like the back of his hand and had the support of most of the population. The Hôtel de Célestin was taken over by the Interior Ministry for the police. The police had to show that they were effective in their repression so as to keep some autonomy. This was rather an illusion, as they were obliged to collaborate more and more with the German police. After the establishment of the so-called Free Zone, only a few German police were sent to Vichy, but that number grew, especially after 1942, when the whole of France was occupied. 25 buildings in the Avenue of the United States were requisitioned. The main building was the Hôtel de Portugal. A Frenchman working in a nearby ministry could hear interrogations being carried out in the cellar as he went to work. After the war, the Hôtel de Portugal was used as an internment camp along with the equestrian centre. Jean Baptistier was a police inspector in 1934. In 1938 he was suspended for his extreme right-wing activities. The occupation by the Germans offered him new opportunities. He became the head of the French section of the German secret police. He was tried as a traitor and executed in 1945. Germany was pillaging all the countries it had invaded. They also needed workers to go to Germany. Not enough were being recruited from the occupied zone. So in 1942, the Vichy government had to help out. This building was a recruitment office. As they still couldn't get enough volunteers, Laval, who was back in the government, organised an exchange scheme. For 3 workers going to Germany, a POW would be released. After the liberation, the Vichysois were happy to pull down the sign and burn the German records. As the German troops advanced across France, many Jews went south and many arrived at Vichy. With the constitutional upheaval of the 10th of July, they weren't too worried. Many were glad to see Petain as head of the government. In March 1941, the Commissariat for Jewish Affairs was set up and housed in the Hotel Algeria. The census they made helped rounding up Jews later on. There was help from some Vichy people. Several families were saved with the help of the local population. So with the German invasion, thousands of French became refugees going south. In Vichy, the equestrian centre was used to house these people. Later, Petain formed a new paramilitary force called the GMR. The equestrian centre became their base. After the liberation, collaborators rounded up. The equestrian centre was used to hold them. The Hôtel de Portugal, the centre of the German police, was also used. The railway station was a point of arrival for many refugees. Politicians would arrive by train also. The resistance found a cheeky way of getting people across the demarcation line. Pierre Laval had a train specially for his use. The railway men had a secret compartment in it to hide resistance and carry clandestine packages. This private residence, called the Pavillon de Sévigny, was made into a hotel in 1842 with a view to attract rich clients. In 1940 it was requisitioned as President Lebrun's residence. It was later assigned to Petain as his residence. The owners were allowed to keep some rooms, and it became the HQ of the French scouts. They often hid Jews and men escaping from the obligatory work service. This shopping complex was built in 2002. Before that there was a building here called the Quatre Chemins, or Four Lanes. This was the centre crossroads of the town. The building was a military hospital. It was used to treat French soldiers up to the end of the war. It finally closed in 1990. At the Liberation, this crossroads was the site for many gatherings and celebrations. In 1941, the casino, which was here, was requisitioned by the French militia. Many resistants were interrogated here. In 1960, it became a cultural centre. The economy of a spa town depends on an influx of tourists between spring and autumn. During the war, this clientele dried up. Most of the hotels were taken by the government, and the people from the north couldn't come anyway. The Petain regime installed a system of passes which allowed people to come for 5 days or more. But it wasn't until 1950 that things got back to the level of 1938.
In 1945, Petain, who designated de Gaulle to be a traitor, was tried and found to be a traitor. He was first sentenced to death, but de Gaulle commuted that to life imprisonment.